Hey there, thrill seekers. Somebody sent me a thrilling video that they found on TikTok. I have heard of this TikTok thing that you kids are all talking about these days, but I don't really know what it is. And this is the first TikTok video that I've seen, I think. I don't know, maybe sometimes they show up on Instagram. Anyway, the first one I've seen that I know was a TikTok video. And if this is what TikTok videos are like, I'm not going to go on TikTok. But anyway, I'll show you the video because it's about Buddhism, and I guess this is making the rounds. If somebody's asking me about it, maybe it's a popular one. Here goes. Let's look at the TikTok video.
If you go through a Buddhist enlightenment, you see that you have no self, you became a passive observer of your acts, and I no longer perceive me stabbing a knife into your eye as my act. But thus, as he puts it, my knife is dancing around, and in the cosmic dance of phenomena, your eye seems to stumble upon it.
We go from Zen Buddhism, which is supposed to be a peaceful religion, to these mindless killing machines stabbing people's eyeballs out that Zizek is describing. Well, here's how it works. He says, the main lesson of history and the tragic lesson of history is that the worst atrocities are committed by people who say that they're just doing their duty, that they were the mindless agents of some other or higher cause. And this is exactly how the Japanese military was able to use Zen Buddhism to radicalize its troops into being killing machines.
So there's the video. The main guy you see at the beginning is a guy named, I'm going to see if I can get this right, Slavoj Žižek. I've seen him before on YouTube videos, and I don't know, I've tried to sit through a couple, but he's just too animated for me and too crazy for me to sit through very long. I guess he's a philosophy guy. And then I don't know who the guy who comes on after him is. But let me try to say a few things about what gets said on this video. First, the idea is that Buddhist enlightenment makes you a mindless killing machine. The guy at the end of the video, he's kind of typical of a person who's probably read a book. I think I know which book he read. He probably read Zen at War by Brian Victoria, or maybe he read somebody's synopsis, or he watched a video where somebody did a 5-minute review of Zen at War by Brian Victoria. I think that seems more likely. And Zen at War by Brian Victoria is a book that talks about the situation that occurred in Japan in which a lot of Zen Buddhists, I don't know, a certain number of Zen Buddhists, prominent Zen Buddhists, were co-opted into helping the Japanese war effort during World War II, and they did make arguments that were somewhat similar to the arguments that the guy makes in the video, that Slavoj and whoever the other dude is in the video make about you're not really killing, you're just doing your duty for a higher power and blah blah blah. That happened, and Nishijima Roshi, my teacher who served in World War II as a soldier, he was about in his early 20s, I think, when the war started, and like most people his age was drafted into the war and served. Apparently he never killed anybody. He was stationed in a remote outpost and never really saw any action. But anyway, he was part of that military, technically. He says that yes, this happened, and it was a shameful part of what happened with Zen Buddhism. You'd like to think that all Zen Buddhists would have been unco-opted by the military and not doing this sort of thing, but some of them did. Just like some churches were co-opted by the Nazis in Nazi Germany. You know, there's a whole thing about how the Catholic Church made an accord with Hitler, and there's a whole story about that. But other Catholic churches and other people were against it. Other Christians were against it. And same thing in Japan. There were Zen Buddhists who were sort of stumping for the war. There were Zen Buddhists who were against it. But the point I want to make is that if all you know about this whole deal is what you see in this video, or what a lot of people on the internet seem to be talking about, you would imagine that Japan back in the days of World War II was like this crazy theocracy, you know, something like Iran or Afghanistan is these days, you know, where everybody's going, Zen Buddhism, yeah, let's kill all the Americans, you know, or something like that. No, the Japanese have never been a very religious people. So the idea that there was a sort of Zen Buddhist Taliban ruling Japan in World War II, that didn't happen. The religious justifications, if you call them that, for the war were mainly coming from Shinto and not Zen Buddhists. I mean, the idea that the emperor was a god in the Shinto sect, and that sorry, I lived in Japan for a long time, that the Japanese were fighting for the preservation of the emperor, who was a god, was more powerful than anything the Zen Buddhists could have mustered. But even that, I don't think, just knowing Japanese people and knowing what they're like and knowing people who lived through that era, I don't even think that would have been the persuasive thing, because they're just, like I say, not very religious. So I'm sure there's a whole other lot of factors that were going in, and if you want to read a history of Japan in World War II, go ahead and you'll learn that there's a lot of interesting factors that went into what happened there. But the idea that the Zen Buddhists were out there leading the charge and that they're the ones to blame for the war, no. I mean, they were part of what was going on during the war, a minor part from my understanding. But as far as leading the charge, no way. But let's also talk about this other idea. Let's see, that Slavoj Žižek is talking about in there. And of course, I haven't seen the whole video that this comes from, so maybe there's some nuance I'm missing. But this idea that he puts forth in this little bit is, kind of common. People do think that this is what happens. It's the idea that some of the teachings of Zen Buddhism in particular, or non-dualism in general, or Buddhism in general, lead to the idea that the person doesn't exist, and therefore you can do anything you want because you have no personal responsibility. That's a big leap. And if you just kind of look at what Mr. Žižek says, which I wrote down a couple of quotes, it I think makes it clear where the problem is, because he says, you see that you have no self, and you become a passive observer of your acts. I no longer perceive stabbing in the eye, I think is what he says, as my act. Now, all of this is spoken from the standpoint of the individual observing self, the ego self. So you see that you have no self. So I am here observing my no selfness over there, or I become a passive observer. So I am over here, my individual ego self, observing passively as my actions take place. What we're talking about in Zen, when we get into these ideas, is way more radical and way more difficult to understand than that. Because our typical way of understanding what non-dualism must be, or what this kind of state of oneness with the universe, if we want to give it that sort of cliched name, the typical way of understanding this is that I sit here and observe my oneness with the universe. And that's not what we're talking about at all. What we're talking about is the universe observes its oneness with the universe. There is no observer and observed. You're completely transcending, and language forces me to speak in this way, but you're completely transcending any observer-observed relationship that could possibly happen. So you're actually flowing into everything, and there is no observed. There is no me seeing that I have no self. It's not that I have this self and I get rid of it and go, oh look, I don't have it anymore, or that I never had it, or whatever. It's a much more weirder view of things. So to the extent that maybe this could be used as a justification for violence, you have to get it completely wrong in order to use it as a justification for violence or doing anything. What he's talking about, what Žižek is talking about, and what the guy after him is talking about, is kind of the Charles Manson version of non-duality. It's that crazy, nutty version that the the individual subjective ego tries to claim non-duality for itself and comes out with just a twisted, crazed version that makes no sense at all. The other thing to point out about Zen Buddhism is that Zen Buddhism has always, from the beginning, had a very, very strong emphasis on ethics. This is not to say that it always works out perfectly and that every Zen Buddhist has been perfectly ethical, which is certainly not the case at all. But Zen Buddhism has always emphasized ethics. There's the precepts, which I did a whole video series maybe last summer about the precepts, and they are very important. Of course, the first precept is do not take life, do not kill. And even though there are kind of metaphysical and mystical ways of understanding do not take life, do not kill, at the foundation of it is also the, the sort of common sense, sort of, that you just don't kill things, once you've got the idea that you don't kill things, in the more common understanding of killing things, like going and strangling somebody or something like that, then you can go on to the more mystical ideas where, subject and object don't exist, so what is killing, and blah blah blah. But you don't get there first. You start first with the just don't kill things sort of aspect. So that's also important to know, that this is essential in the practice. And as I said, in World War II, there's this shameful chapter in which certain Zen Buddhists were co-opted into supporting the military effort, and even then, I'd probably get in trouble for saying this, but I think you have to kind of try to understand the point of view of how this happened, and somebody who has not been in Japan in World War II with bombs dropping and Tokyo getting firebombed so that it looked like a big crater on the Kanto plain. If you ever see pictures of Tokyo after the firebombing, it looks worse than Hiroshima after the atomic bombs, and there were just conventional weapons used on Tokyo. To live through something like that is an extraordinary thing, and is going to put everybody who lives through it into an extraordinary sort of mindset, which would not be typical or indicative of the way they saw things when World War II was not going on. So, it's one thing to kind of lead the charge and invade a foreign country. That's, we can talk for days about how that's not something that you want to do, but a lot of people were trying to defend their own country, their own people, their own neighbors and friends and family from being slaughtered. And whether you agree with the reasons that the country you're in got into the war in the first place or not, once it gets to the point where there's actual danger to yourself and your family and your friends and your loved ones in your city, well, that's a whole other thing. So I always try to reserve judgment when I hear stories of how Zen Buddhists behaved in World War II in Japan, and say, okay, well, it's not what you would wish would happen, but then again, I wasn't there in that situation, and I don't know, honestly, how I would react in a situation that was similar to that if it came down to it and, I were forced to act or not act. So knowing that about myself makes me unable to say, oh, you guys were really bad back then for doing that thing, And I'm not talking about the rape of Nanking or anything, because that was obviously a terrible, terrible, inexcusable thing. I'm talking about more the rank and file people who were, on the ground when these terrible things were happening. That's something quite different. So there you go. There's an opinion that'll get me some comments, maybe. And I'm not saying it just to get comments. I'm just saying I'll probably get comments. But we'll see how that goes. Anyway. thank you for watching. If you still want to donate to me after I said all those terrible things, you can send your donation to hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. That's not actually where you send the donation, but if you go there, you'll find my links to Patreon and PayPal, and those are my main ways of making a living these days. Is pretty much my only means of support. And I just sent my taxes, a long story why it took me so long, off yesterday, and so there was a bill. I thank you for your support. That's my point. And it goes to help me do legit things. So I really do appreciate that. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't have to pay if you don't want to pay. So don't pay if you don't want to. That's fine. But I do thank those of you who do pay. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. What are you looking at? What you looking at, buddy? What you looking at? Is there something out there? Well, thank you for coming out and hanging out with my video. I'm sorry I'm scaring you with the computer. Okay, I'll put the computer away. See ya, bye.